all here for this opening press conference related to the annual meeting, to our 48th annual meeting, the annual meeting 2018. I ask myself sometimes the questions, why is Davos so attractive? And I think your participation here is a demonstration that Davos seems to be attractive. Is it just because it brings interesting people together? Or is there something more behind it? The World Economic Forum, as the international organization for public-private cooperation, and the annual meeting of all our communities clearly respond to a true need of a multipolar, multi-stakeholder, multi-conceptual, interdependent, complex, and fast-moving world. It's a response to a need. And I will share with you, at the outset of this meeting, 7 reasons why such a response to a new world is appropriate. First, governments, business, civil society cannot address alone the multifold challenges we have on the global agenda. We need collaborative efforts. And Davos has become the annual, most representative, high-level, multi-stakeholder summit. We have quotas for each stakeholder groups, and we distinguish, in principle, 6 different stakeholder groups participating in Davos. First, of course, you have governments and business, governments and international organizations with over 300 participants. You have the business community. You have civil society, and I want to underline the participation of the civil society, and you see the names in your material. But then the discussions have also to be enriched by the best expertise. Therefore, we invite universities, experts, academia. Very important, and that's the 5th group, is the young generation. In Davos, we have a great contingent, and a very active contingent of young global leaders and of our community of global shapers. And finally, of course, you have the media. So it's the second reason for the significance of Davos. Today, no global industry or regional issue can be solved in an isolated way. We need a systemic approach. We need an ecosystem. And you see in your material, the World Economic Forum has defined 14 different systems which form a substantial part of the program in Davos. It's not just the plenary sessions, which certainly will be very much attended by you and reported about. For us, what is key are the 400 different working sessions. You could say Davos is a gigantic workshop. That's, by the way, also the reason why governments do not just send the head of state or the head of governments as the head of governments, but you will see certain governments have 8 to 10 ministers in Davos to participate in all those different sessions. As you have seen, the theme, which is actually more a motto, this year is creating a shared future in a fractured world. I don't want to develop more on the theme, but I want to draw your attention to the draft of my opening speech, which you also find in your papers. And by the way, in the opening speech, I will call for what I would define as qualitative easing. I remember 10 years ago when the financial crisis broke out, in my opening speech, I said, this financial crisis will be followed by an economic crisis and afterwards by a social crisis. We are moving out of the financial and economic crisis, but we are still stuck in a social crisis, which requires what I call qualitative easing. The third reason for the relevance of Davos, it's not a standalone meeting. All the sessions, the agenda are embedded into an ongoing workflow with numerous preparatory and follow-up activities. I just want to demonstrate this fact by our Middle East Summit, which we had last year, which acted as a preparation for what we are doing related to the Middle East this year. And you will see we have most of the leaders of the Middle East joining us in Davos. But I would like to mention also our Sustainable Development Impact Summit, where we made during the UN General Assembly Week some progress on specific issues related to the SDGs. In Davos, the forum itself, we launched 3 initiatives: a global network of centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a global center for cybersecurity, and Uplinked, which is the world's foremost innovation accelerator. Let me add a 5th reason for the relevance of Davos. The timing of the annual meeting at the beginning of each year is very important. It allows to focus and to highlight the priorities for the year. If we look at 2018, this year will be decisive for Europe. And therefore, we are pleased to have most or practically all European leaders coming to Davos. I just mentioned President Macron of France, Prime Minister Gentiloni of Italy, Prime Minister May, the President of the European Commission, Mr. Juncker, the King Felipe of Spain, the President and the Prime Minister of Poland, and I could go on and enumerate here practically the leaders of all 27 or 28 countries. A second big issue in Davos will certainly be the future of global cooperation related to trade, environment, fight against terrorism, tax systems, competitiveness. And in this context, it's absolutely essential to have President Trump with us. Another issue certainly discussed in Davos is the future of economic growth. We are possibly at the end of an economic upswing cycle, and the future of economic development, particularly also with related to the policies of central banks next year, will be a big discussion issue. I should also mention that Davos is a place where the G20 agenda and the G7 agenda is prepared. G20 agenda with the presence of President Macri, G7 agenda with the presence of Prime Minister Trudeau. I draw your attention to the publication of the Global Risk Report, which will be, done tomorrow morning. And the Global Risk Report is for us a kind of directive. What are really the key issues in 2018? Another, let's say, special feature of Davos is that it is a mirror of a multipolar world reflecting the rising and promising power. And in this respect, I'm happy to say that now more than 1/3 of the participants come from developing countries or emerging countries. And here, of relevance is the fact that the Prime Minister Modi is the opening speaker on Tuesday, the 23rd of January. And he represents, as you know, the biggest democracy in the world and the fastest growing economy, thanks to bold reforms, the fastest growing economy of the G20 countries. We are also fortunate to, following the visit of President Xi last year, where he made a historical speech, to welcome Liu He, a member of the political bureau of the CPC Central Committee and the head of the Central Leading Group for Financial and Economic Affairs, which reports directly to President Xi. But we also welcome in Davos newcomers. I just want to mention President Lourenço from Angola for the first time in Davos, the president of Zimbabwe, or the newly elected president of the ANC in South Africa, Ramaphosa. What is important for us, and I add an additional feature, is the integration of all those discussions into the context of the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution, which I conceptualized in the book 2 years ago, will not only change business models, but will deeply transform our economic, political, and social systems. So it's very important to use the knowledge which the Forum has accumulated to provide a context for our also political and for our economic discussions. And I have the pleasure to show you a book which just comes out this week, which I wrote together with colleagues. It's Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The first book was an analysis, but now we really have to shape the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So let me just conclude by summarizing. In an intertwined, interdependent, fast-moving world, where traditional ways and organizations have difficulties to cope with the change, Davos should provide 3 particular features. First, a collaborative approach. Nobody today, no country alone, no stakeholder group alone, no individual alone can solve the issues on the global agenda. Second, an integrated approach. No issue can be solved in an isolated way. And finally, a constructive approach. We are living at an inflection point with many opportunities, great opportunities, but also confronting, like never before, perils. There is today a real danger of a collapse of our global systems. But change is not just happening. It is in our hands to improve the state of the world, and that's what the World Economic Forum stands for. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to our Executive Chairman, Professor Klaus Schwab, for that introduction to this 2018 annual meeting. My name is Adrian Monk. I am Head of Public and Social Engagement here at the Forum, and I'll just be, with my colleagues, introducing you to some of the themes and diving a little bit deeper into the sessions and the characters outlined by Professor Schwab in his opening remarks. And I'm going to start by turning to my quite new colleague, been with us a couple of months now, our President Borge Brende, just to speak a little bit to that public figure representation in what is an action-packed annual meeting. Borge.
Thank you, Adrian, and good afternoon to all of you. Why do we have unprecedented participation of public figures this year? 70 head of states and governments, 340 ministers, deputy prime ministers, etc. Part of that answer is that the world at the start of 2018 are faced with some real systemic challenges. If we are not able to deal with them, that can even challenge our planet's capacity to deal with these challenges moving forward. What we know is that what we lack is cooperation that is necessary to address these challenges. Look, for example, at economic growth. Economic growth is back, but it is not as inclusive as it should be. It doesn't create all the jobs we want, and it also has to stick to the planet's capacity. It has to be sustainable. Only if world leaders come together, government leaders, business leaders, but also civil society in a multi-stakeholder way, I think we can then become we can find the solutions that are needed. Look also at, for example, climate change. We had the coldest days in a long time in the east coast of the US and some of the hottest ones in Sydney. How can we make sure that mitigating CO2 emissions doesn't hurt our capacity to also contribute with electricity to the 1.2 billion people in the world that lacks access to electricity? These challenges can only be dealt with in a collaborative way, multi-stakeholder way, and then I think also this is what governmental leaders feel, that coming to Davos, you can really have the right conversations, and also you can then be catalytic in the sense of new initiatives to address these challenges. And if you look then also at the geopolitical aspect, we have representation this year that is very strong regionally. In a multipolar world, of course, the regions are also increasingly important. Africa, we have 10 head of states and governments from Africa. They're coming to Davos to discuss the Horn of Africa. We have a special diplomatic session there with the Prime Minister of Somalia, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and also the key other leaders from Africa. We have a special session on peace and reconciliation in Africa, where we have Peter Maurer, the head of ICRC, also facilitating this. Because we know that where there is conflict, there is no development, and we know that from the MDGs, none of the Millennium Development Goals were met in those countries that were facing war and conflict. So there's a huge peace dividend, and also business can play a constructive role in this. Moving to the Middle East, we have 9 head of states and governments from the Middle East. We will have a special diplomatic session on Syria, moderated by Staffan de Mistura, the special envoy of the UN Secretary General on Syria. We will on Friday continue our work on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, having the Israeli business and Palestinian business community coming together and putting pressure on their leaders to find solutions. It's very interesting that the business community plays this role. And also, as Professor Schwab mentioned, we will practically have a European summit in Davos. We will have more than 40 head of states and governments coming from Europe and Eurasia And Europe is now in a situation where we see that growth is back. There are still a lot of pressing issues. And one of them is the West Balkans. We will have a special diplomatic session this year on the situation in the West Balkans. And we have all the leaders, all the head of state governments from West Balkans sitting together with the EU leadership discussing this. This is really contributing to also a more stable Europe in the future. Other pressing issues that we are facing are also in Latin America. We have unprecedented participation from Latin America, 6 heads of states and governments. And one of the topics will, of course, be Venezuela, where the President of the Dominican Republic, that is the interlocutor on the Venezuela crisis, will be there, also with former Prime Minister Zapatero. This is also working on the peace and reconciliation there to address this. Moving to Asia, we will have a session on the Korean Peninsula, where we will have Under Secretary General of the UN, Jeff Feltman, that just came back from Pyongyang on the request of the government there, and also the Secretary General. This will be discussed in a multi-stakeholder way. And on the international organizations, we will have close to 40 international organizations in Davos, and all the Bretton Woods heads, and also the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. So we will begin with Prime Minister Modi, heading the largest democracy in the world, and we will end then with President Trump heading the largest economy of the world, the US, 25% of the global GDP. But I'm so pleased that we also see the emerging economies, developing countries there, and participating in Davos in a true multi-stakeholder way, and getting all the relevant actors together at the beginning of the year to try to address and solve some of the systemic challenges that we are facing.
Børge, thank you very much. And that participation, as you outlined, it will be framed in some 400 plus sessions. And the person who is responsible with her team for helping design those sessions is with me now, Emma. Emma, can you just tell us a little bit about how you construct this program and how you engage all these participants in these 4 days of activity?
Thank you. Thanks, Adrian. Hello. Yes, I'll take you a little bit behind the scenes of the annual meeting and also highlight a couple of the inspiring people that we've been working with and that will be engaging in the conversations next week. And also just end with a couple of personal highlights in the program this year. The 5-day program comprises over 400 sessions, and in terms of each session, we really think about the intention behind each. And the goal of our team is really to look at ways in which we can change mindsets, that we can help bring fresh perspectives and diverse perspectives into the conversations, but also facilitate the kind of interaction that can lead to real impact. And we don't design the annual meeting in isolation. In fact, we work with many, many different groups, our communities, our stakeholders in consultation year-round. We draw on many of the projects and the initiatives that are also led by the forum with the different stakeholders. And even this year, we've even gone into the classroom of a school in Davos to work with teachers and students to come up with ideas, particularly for our open forum program, which is part of the program that really is access and has full access to the global public as well. And really, the complexity of such a program also comes with a huge responsibility. And I often think of this as very similar to sort of the inner workings of a Swiss watch, where everything needs to work seamlessly together, but also in synchronization. So the right people, the right topic, but also in the right way, so that we create the kind of conditions that can really lead to change. We've heard that we have 3,000 participants in Davos, and I thought it would be helpful just to highlight a few of these. We have 7 co-chairs who've been selected for their outstanding leadership from the public and private sector. For example, we have Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg. We have the Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde. and also the Secretary General of CERN, one of the leading sort of world's research institutes and scientific research centers just across the lake here, Fabiola Gianotti. We also have 12 Nobel laureates coming to Davos this year, from economics, from science, but also representatives of Peace Prize as well. And here we're delighted to have been working with, and will be joining us for the first time, is the education and girls' education activist Malala, and also the child labor activist Kailash Satyarthi. And they'll be joining conversations around gender equality, but also modern slavery, just a few of the topics we'll be addressing in the program. We also have with us and have been working with artists and cultural leaders. And why? Because these are the individuals that can help to sort of speak truth to power, but also help to challenge and inspire those around them. And this year, as is tradition now, on Monday evening we'll open with our Crystal Awards. These are awards that are given to leading artists from around the world who are committed to real change. And this year we'll be awarding the actor and producer Cate Blanchett for her work in helping to raise awareness around the refugee crisis. We are also awarding the solo musical artist Sir Elton John for his work in fighting against HIV/AIDS, and the Bollywood actor Shah Rukh Khan for his work on really championing both children and women's rights in India. So this just gives you a glimpse into the kind of people that are joining us, and why this matters is because Comes to Davos really brings both the experience and the expertise that's absolutely critical to helping to ensure good governance of society. And I'll just end with a couple of personal highlights. I said we have over 400 program sessions and workshops, so choosing the ones I wanted to highlight today has been really, really difficult. But if I were to mention a few, I think the Tuesday afternoon with all 7 co-chairs speaking to their vision, but also their call for creating a shared future in a fractured world. And then as we go into Wednesday and Thursday in the program and start to deep dive into specific issues, we will see Malala, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and Fabiola Gianotti of CERN really mobilizing action around what it will take to realize our human and economic potential through education and empowerment. And then ending the meeting, we have a wonderful lineup of real agents of change in different artists and cultural leaders, photographer Platon, the award-winning film maker Lynette Walworth, as well as Iranian artist Mehdi Ganlanyu, and the Chinese choreographer Jin Xing. And I just want to highlight as well, we don't just think about what goes on behind the 4 walls of each of the session rooms. We have also created numerous exhibitions, installations, simulations, working with the Smithsonian Institution, also with the Science Gallery International, as well as NGO Crossroads Foundation. And these are experiences that we hope will provoke meaningful dialogue. And just one example is where we will be connecting live to different locations around the world to create a dialogue and a two-way exchange in places like Gaza, Mexico City, Colorado, even Herat and other places, where there'll be a two-way dialogue with people that will talk about trust, community, technology, and other important topics. And this is just one way that I think we're really creating real impact. So I'll end there, but really encourage you to read the full program. I know you've all got a copy. 400 sessions, but there are many that really will make a difference. And I encourage you also to join online. We have over 130 sessions online and live, and join the conversation via social media as well. Thank you.
Emma, thank you. Obviously, a big part of Davos is our business participation. And Cheryl Martin, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to tell us a little bit more about that participation and which companies will be represented.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adrian. Thank you, everyone. Emma and Borge have already framed what is going to be a very dynamic and exciting meeting. But as we look at bringing it truly to life, we have to look at what's the breadth and depth of the business engagement that's going to be happening across this week. And I'd like to highlight for you 3 things to help you not only appreciate the annual meeting, but the ongoing and through the year engagement of the companies from around the world. First, I'll talk a little bit about a couple projects that have been making significant traction since last year's annual meeting. Give you a little bit of the detail about who are these business leaders who are going to be here in Davos, and close with just a couple of highlights about some things I'm particularly excited about that we're going to be advancing during the meeting next week. And so let me start with just something that I think everyone can identify as really important. Last year at Davos, we announced the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, a group of several countries coming together with the Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, and throughout this year, almost every company in the vaccine supply chain to say, what and how do we have to do things differently so we, in the globe, can respond to the unknown of where, but certainly it will happen, epidemic threats that we will face. And since the coalition is launched, they've already launched 2 separate initiatives, call for action and funding of vaccine development already in that first year. Certainly a way that we're seeing big difference. Another effort that launched last year in Davos was the Hydrogen Coalition. Through this year, it's developed to be 18 different companies coming together across the hydrogen ecosystem. At COP23, they highlighted a roadmap that actually looked to 2050 and identified significant investment, but also millions of jobs and the ability to potentially address 25% of the emissions reduction needed. Now, if that's not something that's exciting and only happens because you bring together the public and the private sector in these conversations, then I don't know what is. In addition, though, we have other conversations around energy, like the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which was launched on the Forum's platform several years ago, bringing out its first investments. And in addition, work on grid transformation and electrification that has moved from last year a global set of learnings and best practices to actual implementation with policy in the country of Colombia this year. And so you can see not only the richness of individual efforts, but how they come together to really start to have a systemic conversation. And the business is at the center of that. And so who do we have coming to Davos? I think 2 of the people we should highlight immediately are 2 of our business co-chairs. Isabel Coker, the CEO of the Engie Group, in energy, certainly, and then Ginny Romney of IBM, both of whom absolutely passionate. We're going to hear them on Tuesday with the rest of the co-chairs share their vision about a fractured world and what we're going to do about it. But in addition, we have almost 1,900 other business leaders globally, about 1/3 of them from each Europe, North America, and the rest of the world. Many, many CEOs and C-suite executives, but not just from the global companies, from the startup and the technology enabling community, as well as some of our own global leaders. And so we're very, very excited about these leaders coming together. And as Professor Schwab said, coming to one of the biggest, largest workshops that they could possibly imagine to engage at the most senior levels in these conversations. And so let me close with the 2 examples of some things that I also think are thought-provoking as we think about moving things forward. Just very recently, we launched another one of our health efforts on value-based healthcare. In partnership with the City of Atlanta, 40 organizations came together for a 5-year pilot on cardiac heart failure, with a goal of having, in 10 years, 30,000 lives saved because we're focused on the patient and not just on the treatment. If we can have that type of effort, and in Davos we'll be having a conversation about how do we roll this out further in things like diabetes with Canada, how do we move this in coronary heart disease with Singapore, and in other discussions with countries like the Netherlands. And so continuing to move these impactful multi-stakeholder efforts forward in ways that re-envision how and why we think about healthcare. And last but not least, I think our efforts in promoting global financial inclusion While we've had this effort for multiple years, I think we're seeing very significant traction, looking at how and why these technologies of the fourth industrial revolution enable us to think about digital enablement of financial inclusion. But it's not just the finance companies coming together. It's finance companies and the telecoms companies and consumer companies with the governments and the NGOs and academics in order to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue about what has to be advanced. This past year, we saw great traction, again in Colombia, with actually legislative action in these areas and some really interesting pilots in Mexico. And as we come through and into 2018, through Davos and into 2018, looking at East Africa, where we move in work in Rwanda to Tanzania and Kenya with their central banks. So again, this business-driven, multi-stakeholder engagement in order to really impact people's lives and truly make a difference. And so I could clearly go on. I clearly have no enthusiasm about this subject, but I will happily turn over to my colleague Sadia to talk a little bit more about some areas equally of interest to business on skills and technology and economic growth. So Adrian, thank you.
Thank you. And Sadia, that's your cue. I know you engage with civil society and also tell us a little bit more about the social issues, which are a big part of the Davos agenda this year.
Professor Schwab referred to the recovery since the financial crisis and also pointed to a social crisis that is starting to unfold. Any growth, for it to be meaningful, has to be inclusive. Next week, we'll be launching our Inclusive Development Index that points to how countries are performing on inclusion, on intergenerational equity, and on sustainability. Unsurprisingly, we find that while growth is recovering, there are still major challenges when it comes to equity and inclusion across both rich economies and poor economies. So what are we trying to do to help solve that problem? And this is something that we're not doing just at Davos, but really working year-round, and Davos becomes one moment in which some of these stakeholders are able to come together. Let me give you 3 examples. One, we will be producing next week for public view job transition maps. So a truck driver who is being displaced in their current role, what are the opportunities for that person to reskill and move towards a new job? What are the opportunities for an administrative assistant? What are the opportunities for a customer service worker? This will be laid out in this large big data exercise we've been doing over the last few months. Second, how do we translate that knowledge into real, tangible action? That is where we're working with coalitions of businesses, as Cheryl mentioned, to try to do some of that reskilling and upskilling that's required in the workforce so that people are ready for those new opportunities. We'll be announcing that a coalition of just 25 companies at this stage are making an announcement to reskill 10 million people by 2020, 2 million of which has already been achieved, and we'll be sharing more on that next week. And one core industry as a part of that is the IT industry, which has put together a portal with their digital skills and trainings, which is aiming for reskilling 1 million people as a part of that 10 million group that will be targeted. The third example relates to diversity and gender equality. I think we all know that some of these opportunities for fulfilling your potential are often missing for women due to outdated norms and structures. We're working in a public-private collaboration exercise with the Inter-American Development Bank in 3 countries in Latin America already, and we'll be announcing a 4th and announcing up to 10 by the end of 2018 to accelerate gender equality, particularly in the context of the 4th Industrial Revolution and the new opportunities it's offering. Finally, none of these efforts could move forward without the engagement of civil society, without the unions that represent the world's workers, the NGOs that support and provide relief to some of the most disadvantaged communities in the world, the social entrepreneurs that provide new opportunities to many communities around the world, and the religious leaders that represent the different identities and values of people in different communities around the world. We're very pleased that 140 civil society leaders will be joining us, including 2 of the co-chairs, Sharon Burrow, representing the world's workers, and Chetna Sinha, who is representing women entrepreneurs. Thanks.
Sadia, thank you very much. And lastly, I'm going to turn to Dominic Warre, who heads our public-private partnerships We are the Organisation for Public-Private Collaboration. So Dominic, can you just tell us a little bit more about some of those highlights from the annual meeting programme?
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. And you've heard already from our panel a number of excellent examples of where the public and private and civil society have come together and really tackle some systemic challenges. It's surprising and interesting across the course of the year how many of these events and activities and workshops and get-togethers that we do really create kind of interesting and important outcomes. A couple more from the spring. We were delighted to help a number of governments and businesses launch a $400 million fund to kickstart investment for deforestation-free agriculture. We're working with an alliance of governments who represent 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions to accelerate clean energy innovation across their economies, building on some of the comments that Cheryl shared with you about the substantive interaction between business and government on some of these tricky issues. But above and beyond that, these platforms for shaping the future that Professor Schwab set out, for instilling that sense of cooperation in the world that we live in. We had a very, very interesting and exciting year on these matters. We inaugurated our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco with its remit to maximize the benefits of science and technology for society. We're delighted that there are now 8 projects up and running at that center involving governments and business and experts to really kind of figure out what are the safeguards that we need in global society to maximize the opportunities of things like artificial intelligence, things like precision medicine, and many other matters besides. We also had a very important development which Professor Schwab mentioned to you in September at the time of the General Assembly of the United Nations. That was the first Sustainable Development Impact Summit. You've heard of these global goals of the UN, and you've heard of the need for cooperation across the public and private. How to bring people together to accelerate and scale that delivery. That's exactly what 2 days of discussion with 700 participants, including civil society, NGO leaders, business people, and heads of these international organizations worked on. There were some very, very interesting results. An $850 million fund supported by Denmark and other countries to invest in the global goals. A new alliance, the Global Battery Alliance, to bring together industry and other actors to deal with child labor, to deal with pollution, to deal with innovation, and to create clean energy solutions in this growing market of batteries we'll need to power the fourth industrial revolution. So a lot has been going on, and in fact that makes the annual meeting 2018, as you've heard, a very, very exciting milestone for us, particularly for these 14 system initiatives which have been mentioned, these platforms for cooperation between the public and private. Some highlights from the week ahead of us. There are so many that it's impossible to draw everything to your attention, and your paperwork and the website will have more. But there are 3 which I think are very exciting to us. We're going to be launching our new Global Centre for Cybersecurity, focused on capacity building, policy development and scenario planning to help protect us all from the risks of cyber attack. Pensions. We've all got a pension in the room. You'll have noticed during the year, I am sure, that we had a very, very interesting piece of work that detected a pension time bomb. The largest pension funds in the world are facing people who are living longer and saving less. If we don't act, there will be a $400 trillion gap between what is needed and what people will look for their pensions by 2050. That's 5 times the size of the world economy. So bringing together right now leaders from the financial system, from those involved in pensions and institutional investors and governments to figure out what to do before this problem strikes. And then moving into other areas, we're delighted to look forward to launching a major new action agenda on oceans. You've all have seen, I'm sure many of you reported on, the challenge of plastic pollution in the oceans, of overfishing, of ocean acidification, bringing together the leaders in this space, leading scientists, international organizations and businesses. And it was in 2016, Adrian, as I'm sure you'll remember, that we at the forum with some of our partners put the first report out identifying the issue of plastic pollution in the ocean. And since then, this agenda has just taken off. So we're very excited to turn analysis into action. Finally, I'd say that across this theme that you've heard from the panel of bringing together the public and the private, of blending the finance, the innovation, the entrepreneurialism and the desire to change, to make things better, to shape our future agenda will form a very strong narrative through many of these system initiative themes of food, of energy, of mobility, of the future of production systems, the future of our consumption systems. And we even have, in collaboration with the OECD, a Sustainable Development Investment Partnership which was launched in 2015, and its goal, with 60 projects already in its pipeline, its goal is to mobilize $100 billion of investment in infrastructure for the global goals by 2020. So we have a lot that's happened over the year. We've got a very exciting week ahead of us, and I have to say that there's a lot of work of public-private cooperation ahead of us into 2018. Thank you.
Dominic, and to my colleagues, big thank you. I hope that's given you a comprehensive look at all of the many topics and participants that we'll be seeing in Davos next week. We have around 15 minutes left for questions. If I could just get a sense in the room of who might have a question, just put your hand up if you could for me, and I can then see where we need to direct our microphone. If with your question you could also tell us your name and your news organization, that would be fantastic. If we start in the far corner with that gentleman and the gentleman there, that would be fantastic. No, we just need a little bit of volume on your microphone. And we're going to get you another one almost instantaneously. There we go.
Thank you very much. Tom Miles from Reuters News Agency. Globalization has made the financial elite who donate to politicians very, very wealthy. But it's left millions of our workers with nothing but poverty and heartache. So said Donald Trump in 2016. So what makes you think that bringing Trump to Davos, which is surely the home of globalization, if nothing else, is going to get him to buy into the Davos doctrine? Do you think you're going to be able to get him to play the team game that you like to play? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom, for that question. And certainly you'll see by our logo that we're committed to improving the state of the world rather than to advancing the interests of globalization. And if you recall over the years, our chairman's editorials, in particularly in the 1990s, on exactly this issue, when Klaus warned fulsomely of the dangers of unbridled globalization. I think you'll find it's a theme that's frequently been taken up in Davos. But I'll turn perhaps to Borge to just address the idea of President Trump's participation.
So I second what you just said, Adrian, and also as Professor Schwab said in his opening remarks here, very important for us is also to address this with quality easing and also with equitable globalization. This is for us very important that growth needs to be inclusive, it needs to create jobs, and it needs to be sustainable. And I think participants are really looking forward to also hear the leader of the largest economy in the world, President Trump, share his vision for the global economy moving forward. But I think what all we have presented here today shows that we really care about the growth being more inclusive, about skills, about equal opportunities, and we will not be able to address these issues in an effective way without having all stakeholders with us. That means also business, governments, and civil society.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, just a minute.
Thank you. Nie Xiaoyang from China's Xinhua News Agency. My question is to Mr. Professor Schwab. Professor Schwab, you just mentioned the historical speech by Chinese President Xi Jinping last year in Davos, and you also have traveled a lot to China. And I believe you probably know China much better than most of the people in the Western world. So my question is, what do you expect from China to contribute to create a shared future, especially to change and improve this you called fractured world? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. It's a very good point, and it is true perhaps that I think Professor Schwab's first visit to China was in 1979 at the invitation of Deng Xiaoping. Can I just get the microphone to Professor Schwab?
No, I think it's next year that we celebrate the 40th time that a Chinese delegation will join us, a high-level governmental delegation will join us in Davos. So we have accompanied China from the beginning of its opening up and reform policies. We had the very important, many people would say historical speech of President Xi. I don't want to repeat what he said. I think we are very fortunate to have His Excellency Mr. Liu He with us. We know about his crucial role in shaping the economic policy of China, and we expect that he, at a very important moment, because it's after the Party Congress, will explain to you the next phase of Chinese economic policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we've got more questions in the middle and just there, so can we get a microphone, lady there and the gentleman there?
Claudia Kneem, Swiss Press Agency. Question to Mr. Schwab. We all know that Donald Trump is going to dominate the topic, and we all know about him. So I wonder, what is your hope? What the spirit of Davos should do to Donald Trump?
That's a very good point. I just want to take the gentleman there as well. Thanks.
Yes, Jamil Chad, I'm a journalist from Brazil. My question is also to Mr. Schwab. You're going to have, for the first time in 4 years, a president of Brazil. Mr. Temer will be speaking on the same date that President Lula will be judged in Brazil. So my question to you is, what do you expect to hear from Mr. Temer, and what do you expect from the reforms in Brazil? Thank you.
So I'm going to just turn to my colleague, Borge Brenda, to just perhaps take on those questions, because he's participated in the annual meeting not just as a member of the forum staff, but also as a foreign minister representing Norway. And you perhaps can talk a bit more about the spirit of Davos and what that really means from both dimensions, perhaps. And also, we have an extremely strong Latin American presence, as you mentioned, and part of that presence is President Temer. And perhaps just speak a little bit, given that we will also be in Sao Paulo this year with our Forum on Latin America.
I think the latter point is also very important. We will then have our first summit after Davos in Latin America, Sao Paulo, in March. We are expecting great participation from the whole of Latin America, and we see also that the Brazilian economy is really again growing. I think President Temer will also share his views there on how to make that growth even more inclusive. For me, as a former foreign minister, I also had the pleasure of going to Davos as a participant. I, in many ways, feel it is the workshop that's already mentioned, but it's also in many ways the summit of summits beginning of the year, because you add on top of the government's business and civil society, and that's the only way to really deal with challenges moving forward. Now, my view is that I think this also has triggered the great American participation this year, with 8 secretaries, 8 cabinet members of the US is coming to Davos and staying, most of them, for the whole week. Commerce, Treasury. We will also have Secretary Tillerson on Thursday joining President Trump. And I think Davos always has a great impact on all of us when we go there, because it's unique, because one has all walks of life represented there.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes left for questions. Can I just get a sense, lady at the back? and there's a couple of questions just on that side.
Thank you. Lisa Schlein, Voice of America. I was wondering, dealing with the bookend speakers, so to speak, you have Prime Minister Modi, who is representing the emerging world. He is opening the forum, and President Trump is ending the forum. What themes will they be dealing with? Can you give us a sneak preview of what they will be discussing, whether you expect that their viewpoints will be complementary, or whether they will have pretty divergent views of everyone's so-called fractured world? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I can just take the two questions just there.
Yes, thank you. Alain Franco, RTS Radio. We are all convinced that the spirit of Davos is very high and has a big impact on everybody. But did you get any commitment from President Trump that he will play the game and answer to this need you were talking about to struggle against this world and have more cooperation?
Thank you. And just a question, finally, your colleague next door.
Yes, thank you. Konrad Sterling from Blick, Switzerland. Obviously, the Swiss public is psyched about Mr. Trump's visit to Switzerland. Can you give us any more details on his trip? Well, you said that most of his cabinet members are going to stay for the whole week. When is he going to arrive, and when is he going to leave?
Well, I think we can start perhaps by sharing the time he'll be speaking on Friday, which is now been finalised, which is one point we can share, most definitely. I think in terms of sneak previews of speeches, it would be unfair to very notable speakers to take any thunder away from their moments on the podium. But we do expect speakers to embrace and recognise the theme of the meeting, which is obviously creating a shared future in a fractured world. But perhaps I can turn again to Borger and just get your sense on some of the details around President Trump's speech, and also just a reminder of the timing on Prime Minister Modi's opening.
So, of course, Modi and Trump are very important, and Modi is opening, and Trump is doing speaking at the closing or almost at the end of our annual meeting. But we should not forget that we have 70 head of states and governments there. We also on Wednesday have a really important European day. We have the newly elected president of France, Macron, speaking. Gentiloni will also on Thursday have Secretary General Guterres with us also addressing. And, we have G7 presidency of this year with Trudeau, and G20 president, headed by Argentina and President Macri. So I think they will be complementary to each other, but each of these speakers and leaders, of course, will then have their own viewpoint and share their insight. And for participants, it's also very interesting to see, like we have seen before, how they position and which challenges they put most emphasis on. And the dialogue that's always there in Davos is also crucial. So we are very well prepared for this. I think the planning now is for President Trump to speak at 2 o'clock on Friday. I think for Prime Minister Modi, I believe it's 11 o'clock on Tuesday. I'm looking here at my colleague Lee Howell in the front, so I don't make any mistakes on the timing. So I think we're pretty good to go.
So for everyone who has registered onto the forum's application, you'll see that our program is being constantly updated. You'll see some new timings come in. I think we've shared with you one of the preliminary programming lists where you'll see all of the sessions that Emma was talking about. I hope you'll have gotten a sense from my colleagues here and from Professor Schwab just how rich and deep some of the conversations that we'll be having in Davos are, and just how important some of the topics to be tackled are. There'll be opportunities at the end just to have individual follow-ups with any of our panelists. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I hope you'll join us in wishing a successful...
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jerry Rice of the IMF. We're delighted to welcome you here today for the launch of our World Economic Outlook update. In just a second, I will leave it to our economic councillor, Maury Obsveld, to my right, to introduce the WEO update as the research department. That's Gian Maria Milesi Ferretti. But immediately, I would like to introduce the managing director of the IMF, Madame Christine Lagarde, who will make some opening remarks on this World Economic Outlook update. Thank you, Madame Lagarde.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry, and welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here with us today. This is actually the first time that the International Monetary Fund presents its midterm outlook on the occasion of the World Economic Forum, and I want to thank Klaus Schwab for hosting us on this occasion. It also gives us the pleasure of seeing all of you, which wouldn't be the case if we were currently in Washington. I will be very happy to introduce in a minute Maurice Obsveld, who actually needs no introduction, and he and his team will walk us through their findings for the update of the World Economic Outlook. But I want to give you just a few words of introduction, just to give you the landscape as we see it at the moment. Global growth has been accelerating since 2016, and all signs point to a continuous strengthening of that growth this year in 2018 and next year in 2019. So this is very welcome news. And being here and having arrived to the media center in the middle of the snow, we might all think of the words by William Blake, "In the winter, enjoy." But we believe that this would be a mistake, and that complacency is actually one of the risks that we should guard against. We certainly should feel encouraged by the strengthened growth, but we should not feel satisfied. Now, why is that? First of all, there are still too many people who are left out of that recovery and acceleration of growth. In fact, about 1/5 of emerging and developing countries, 1/5 of emerging and developing countries saw their per capita income decline in 2017. Second reason why we should not feel entirely satisfied is that this is clearly a cyclical, mostly a cyclical recovery. And absent continuous reforms, the fundamental forces that had us so much worried about this new mediocre that we feared, in other words, the scars from the crisis, the low productivity, the aging population, and on, and future potential growth, all of that will continue to weigh on medium-term prospects. Third reason why we should not be entirely satisfied: there are uncertainty in the year ahead. The long period of low interest rates has led to a build-up of potentially serious financial sector vulnerability, and we are seeing a troubling increase in debt across many countries, and we need to remain watchful. Now, you will say this is the responsibility of the IMF to constantly see the potential downside risks even down the road, if not in the immediate short term. And yes, it is our responsibility. Doesn't change the fact that we are quite upbeat for the immediate future. But what we're seeing in the more medium term gives us ground for worry. Now, I did say at the October annual meeting that, quoting John Fitzgerald Kennedy, that it's when the sun is shining that you want to repair the roof. I will not venture there today, but it's clearly when the snow stops that here they clear the roads. And the same analogy works. It's a perfect opportunity actually now for the world leaders to repair their roof. And the theme of this year's annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, creating a shared future in a fractured world, clearly demonstrates that. Let me outline 3 areas where I believe that the sharing has a meaning. First of all, shared growth. We think that policymakers should use these very circumstances to make the difficult structural and fiscal reforms that might not happen otherwise, or that were too difficult in times of hardship. And that means taking steps to boost long-term growth, paying down debt in places where it's too high, and in other places investing back into the economy through infrastructure and effective social spending. Now, why is it shared, you will say? Because sharing begins by mending your own turf. Second, shared opportunity. We will hear plenty about that in the course of this week. Growth, in our view, needs to be more inclusive, not only across country, which has occurred over the course of the last few decades, but within countries. And some areas of focus, in our view, require training for workers that are displaced or at risk of being displaced by new technologies and globalization. We need those new opportunities for workers at risk. We need new opportunities for young people. And we need new opportunities for women as well, and them being included safely in the workplace. Finally, sharing is about global responsibilities. We need robust international cooperation if we are going to tackle shared problems. And that includes fighting corruption, improving the international trading system, tackling tax evasion, addressing climate change issues, and on and on. So while we should certainly appreciate this season and the good news that we have, we should also certainly focus on the measures that are needed today for long-lasting solutions in order to have that better shared future. With that, I'm very honored to turn the floor over to Maury, who will present to you in details their findings and the update, and I will sit very diligently and listening attentively to what he has to say, and then I'll disappear. Maury, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Managing Director. Good afternoon, everyone. The honor is ours to have you introduce this press conference, which is very exceptional, so everyone should know that. This is not how we usually do it. And I'm also going to thank Jerry Rice, who's our Director of Communications, who will be organizing the questions, and Gian Maria Milesi Ferretti, who's Deputy Director of our Research Department. And as it won't come as a surprise that my remarks will echo a number of the things the Managing Director has just said. As the year 2018 begins, the world economy is gathering speed. Our new World Economic Outlook update revises our forecast for the world economy's growth for both 2018 and 2019 to 3.9%. This is true for both years, and for both years, this is 0.2 percentage point higher than last October's forecast. And it's also 0.2 percentage point higher than our current estimate of 2017 global growth. This is very good news. But, and the IMF always has a but, political leaders and policymakers must stay mindful that the present economic momentum reflects a confluence of factors that is unlikely to last for long. The global financial crisis may seem firmly behind us, but without prompt action to address structural growth impediments, enhance the inclusiveness of growth, and build policy buffers and resilience, the next downturn will come sooner, and it will be harder to fight. Every government should be asking itself 3 questions today. First, how can we raise economic efficiency and output levels over the long term? Second, how can we support resilience and inclusiveness while reducing the likelihood that the current upswing ends in an abrupt slowdown or even in a new crisis? And third, how can we be sure to have the policy tools we will need to counter the next downturn? Looking first at where we are now, we at the fund see the world economy as follows. The primary sources of GDP acceleration so far have been in Europe and Asia, with improved performance also in the US, Canada, and some large emerging markets, notably Brazil and Russia, both of which were actually shrinking in 2016, and also in Turkey. Much of the momentum will carry through into the near term. The recent US tax legislation will contribute noticeably to US growth over the next few years, largely because of the temporary, exceptional investment incentives that it offers. These short-term growth boosts will have positive, albeit short-lived output spillovers for US trade partners, but will also likely widen the US current account deficit, strengthen the dollar somewhat, and affect international investment flows. Trade is again growing faster than global output, driven in part by higher global investment, and commodity prices have moved up, benefiting those countries that depend on commodity exports. Even as economies return to full employment, inflation pressures remain contained and nominal wage growth remains subdued. Financial conditions are quite easy, with booming equity markets, low long-term government yields and borrowing costs, compressed corporate borrowing spreads, and attractive borrowing terms for emerging market and developing economies. How do we explain the current upturn? Well, it did not arise by chance. It began to take hold in the middle of 2016, roughly, and owes much to accommodative macroeconomic policies, which supported market sentiment and hastened natural healing processes. Monetary policy has long been and remains accommodative in the largest countries, underpinning the current easy global financial conditions. Even though the US Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates gradually, it has been cautious, having wisely responded to the turbulence of early 2016 by postponing previously expected rate hikes. The ECB has started to taper its large-scale asset purchases, which have played a critical role in reviving euro area growth, but has also signaled that interest rate increases are a more distant prospect. Moreover, fiscal policy in advanced economies has, on balance, shifted from contractionary to roughly neutral over the past few years, while China has provided considerable fiscal support since its growth slowed in mid-decade, with important positive spillovers to its trade partners. In the US, of course, fiscal policy is now poised to take a markedly expansionary turn with complex effects on the world economy. Our view, however, is that the current upturn, while welcome, is unlikely to become a new normal and faces medium-term downside hazards that likely will grow over time. We see several reasons, to some extent reflected in our medium-term growth projections, to doubt the durability of the current momentum. First of all, advanced economies are leading the upswing, but once their output gaps close, they will return to longer-term growth rates that we still expect to be well below pre-crisis rates. While we project advanced economy growth of 2.3% in 2018, our assessment of the group's longer-term potential growth is only about 2/3 as high. Demographic change and lower productivity growth pose obvious challenges, and these call for major investments in people and research. Fuel exporters face especially bleak prospects and must find ways to diversify their economies. A second reason we think this is not a new normal is that the two biggest national economies driving current and near-term future growth are predictably headed for slower growth. China contributes the bulk of global growth, and it will both cut back the fiscal stimulus of the last couple of years and, in line with the stated intentions of its authorities, rein in credit growth to strengthen its overextended financial system. And consistent with these plans, the country's ongoing and necessary rebalancing process implies lower future growth. As for the other big driver of global growth, the United States, whatever output impact its tax cut will have on an economy so close to full employment will be paid back partially later in the form of lower growth as temporary spending incentives, notably for investment, expire, and as increasing federal debt takes a toll over time. Thirdly, as important as they have been to the recovery, easy financial conditions and fiscal support have also left a legacy of debt, government and in some cases corporate and household debt, in advanced and emerging economies alike. Inflation and interest rates, it is true, remain low for now, but a sudden rise from current levels, perhaps due to pro-cyclical policy developments, would tighten financial conditions globally and prompt markets to reevaluate debt sustainability in some cases. Elevated equity prices would also be vulnerable, raising the risk of disruptive asset price adjustments. Fourthly, despite rising growth in Europe, Asia, and North America, there is less good news in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, the last area weighed down by the weakness of its larger economies. Low growth, driven in part by adverse weather effects and sometimes combined with civil strife, has sparked significant outward migrations. Improvements in some large Latin American economies are notable, but aggregate growth in the region will be weighed down this year by continuing economic collapse in Venezuela. Finally and fifthly, even though the recovery has lifted employment and aggregate income from crisis lows, voters in many advanced economies have soured on political establishments, doubting their ability to deliver broadly shared growth in the face of tepid real wage gains, reduced labor shares in national income, and rising job polarization. A turn to more nationalistic or authoritarian governance models, however, could result in stalled economic reforms at home and a withdrawal from cross-border economic integration. Both developments would harm longer-term growth prospects to the detriment of those who have already fallen behind over the past few decades. Levels of inequality are high in emerging markets and low-income economies as well, and there too carry the seeds of eventual future disruptions unless growth can be made more inclusive. This situation creates challenges for policymakers. Perhaps the overarching risk at the moment is complacency. While the current conjuncture might appear to be a sweet spot for the global economy, prudent policymakers must look beyond the near term. No matter how tempting it is to sit back and enjoy the sunshine, policy can and should move to strengthen this recovery. Now is the time to build policy buffers, reinforce defenses against financial instability, and invest in structural reforms, productive infrastructure, and people. And I stress the people. The next recession may be closer than we think, and the ammunition with which to combat it is much more limited than a decade ago, notably because public debts are also much higher. An upswing so broad also furnishes an ideal moment to act on a range of multilateral challenges. These include countering global financial stability threats, including cyber threats, strengthening the multilateral trading system, cooperating on international tax policy, including the fight against money laundering, and promoting sustainable development in low-income economies. Of especially urgent importance is to fight irreversible environmental damage, notably from climate change. With that, I'll turn it over to Jerry.
Well, thank you very much, Maury.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Madame Lagarde. We'll now turn to your questions in the room. Just to mention, you have the WEO update, the document. We will release Maury's remarks to you. We're doing that now. And we will release Madame Lagarde's remarks to you as well. So we have a large audience here in the room. We have a very large audience online. And we'll turn to your questions if you could keep them as short as possible. And please recognize, identify yourself by name and affiliation. Thank you. Let's start here with Bloomberg. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enda Curran from Bloomberg News. I wonder, you mentioned that the overarching risk is complacency. And you mentioned we might be closer to a recession than we think.
Yeah. It's hard to identify one risk as the because I think all are quite worrisome, and they also interact. And so I think policymakers really need to think broadly, comprehensively, and for the long term, not just over the next political cycle, which is sometimes hard for them. You know, as an example, I flagged the lower long-term growth rates. These are part and parcel of the sort of political dissatisfaction I think we've been seeing in many economies, particularly as the fruits of growth have been quite unequally distributed, and in some countries increasingly so. Financial stability, how we regulate the financial sector, is also not disconnected with concerns about inequality. I think pushing on one priority would probably do a disservice to the challenge that policymakers face. They really need a broad approach, one that is very comprehensive.
Thank you. Okay, just maybe taking the lady in the second row here. Second row, thank you.
Alicia González from El País. You mentioned specifically Spain in the report. And you reduce the perspectives for this year because of political uncertainty, but you raise it for next year. So must I assume that you believe the political uncertainty will finish, or that we will have any other stimulus of any kind? Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're certainly hopeful that the political situation and the uncertainty that it causes will diminish, and that while this is an internal matter for Spain, that within the laws of the country, some way to move forward will be reached. For the current year's forecast, we did do a downgrade. This reflects some uncertainty from the Catalonia situation, coupled with some optimism, because there is growth in the Eurozone, and this will benefit Spain. And we expect that momentum to carry over into 2019. Spain is now benefiting. I mean, the growth has been above 3% for several years now. It's benefiting from past reforms. We think that pace is not quite sustainable, but we do see healthy growth for the next couple of years. I don't know if Jean Maria wants to add to that, or.
No, I would just mention that the external environment is clearly helpful, because we are forecasting a strong recovery in the euro area, including for 2019. So that supports Spanish exports.
Thank you very much. Okay, just moving around. Lady in the third row. Yes, ma'am.
Sandra from Tencent. Two questions. First of all, China actually has been the growth engine during the 2008 financial crisis. Right now, it has been 10 years from there, and you just mentioned China goes through its rebalancing process. So what role China plays right now comparing to 10 years ago? And the second one is, let's say in this year, let's say if Fed will raise rates the same pace as last year, do you worry it's going to have more pressure on the emerging market? Thank you.
Yeah. China, of course, carried out a very large fiscal stimulus at the time of the crisis. This was a strong support not only for Chinese growth, but for global growth. And even though China's growth rate has come down, given its size in the world economy, given its relatively high growth rate, it is still a major source of growth. There are certainly challenges which the leadership has recognized in terms of strengthening further financial regulations, strengthening further hard budget constraints on state-owned enterprises, strengthening the relationship between local and federal budgets. So there are challenges there, but you know, we see China as a strong driver of global growth going forward. You know, as far as the Fed is concerned, we will expect them to you know, look at the situation in the U.S. and make data-dependent decisions to attain their mandate, which is you know, full employment, stable prices. I think the communication over the last couple of years has been particularly good. The adjustment has been gradual. This has not overly stressed the emerging markets, and our baseline would be for that to continue.
Thank you. Okay, just swinging around. In the front row, gentlemen.
Hi. Quite a lot of the last little while, sorry, my name's Alec Hogg from biznews.com. Quite a lot of the last little while is to do with geopolitics. We've seen Southern Africa, some dramatic changes in the political situation there. Are you reading, like Goldman Sachs does, which in the weekend said that South Africa is their top emerging market for 2018? Have you worked any of that into your calculations?
Yeah, I mean, basically, these update numbers predate the, you know, what has been going on in South Africa, these very recent developments, and so we will have more of that in our spring numbers when we issue the World Economic Outlook. But we have not, you know, fully incorporated those very recent developments.
A general comment on what's going on there?
I think we have to wait and see how this works out.
Okay, lady in the front row too.
Thank you. Ivana Kotosova, CNN. You mentioned that tax policies in the US will have impact on growth globally, attributing about half of that upgrade to the tax policies. Do you expect the same to happen after 2022? Is the US growth going to become a drag on the global growth because of the tax policies and the slowdown that you expect there?
Yeah, well, we don't, you know, I should preface this by saying that the tax bill and its impact is quite complex, and there's a lot of uncertainty around our estimates. Given that some of the features of the tax bill are explicitly temporary, we do expect there to be some payback. For example, temporary expensing of investment should give a surge of investment in the near term, but when that stops, there will be some payback of that. On the other hand, some of the features, the cut in corporate tax, the move to a territorial system, are not temporary. We also incorporate in our forecast the pay-go provisions, which would require cuts in government expenditure going forward as the deficit grows. Hard to say whether those will be adhered to or relaxed. So there's certainly some potential for the payback in U.S. growth to result in slower import growth in the U.S., which would affect trading partners. That's somewhat symmetric with what's happening in the current years, but how big those effects would be, you know, how the overall picture would look is very hard to predict.
Thank you, Mark. Probably have time for a couple more. Gentleman in the second row here. Yes, sir.
Thank you. It's Stephen Fiddler from the Wall Street Journal. When you talk about repairing the roof, are you also suggesting that the Eurozone nations should enact structural reforms to increase risk sharing, such as deposit insurance and a common fiscal policy among them? And a quick second one is, do you see any risk, systemic risk, in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies?
You know, in Europe, a number of European countries over the last few years have enacted important structural reforms. I mentioned Spain a few years back, the Jobs Act in Italy. President Macron's plans for France are quite ambitious. But it would be fair to say that a much broader push incorporating even more nations would benefit the Eurozone countries and the EU generally. Now, that's not an architectural issue. That's something every country has to do on its own. As far as the architectural issues are concerned, we certainly promote a completion of the banking union. The structures that have been created, the single supervisory mechanism, the single resolution mechanism, are great steps forward, but more can be done, for example, in the area of deposit insurance. We also would like to see more in the way of a central fiscal capacity. So part of the the project of fixing the roof is certainly to enhance and improve the architecture of the Eurozone. On Bitcoin, we don't like to comment on specific cryptocurrencies. From the sort of blockchain technology in general, we see possible advantages in terms of the efficiency of payment systems and inclusion. It's an interesting development. We also see that cryptocurrencies could offer risks, and it's going to be important for regulators to be watching very carefully to make sure that the risks don't materialize.
Okay, thank you very much, Maury. Yes, the lady in the back row. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Helena Humphrey, Deutsche Welle, Berlin. Is growth in itself not an outdated concept or measurement when we're seeing the benefits of the last cycle filter through to fewer and fewer people?
Yeah. I think there are two aspects of your question. One aspect is, is GDP the right way to look at welfare? And there I would argue, certainly no, but it's probably better than all the other ways that have been suggested. But it clearly leaves out a lot, and to the extent we can improve our measurement of what the economy produces, both positively and negatively. The economy also produces climate damage, and that is not measured in GDP, although in principle we could do that. So that's sort of one issue. The other issue is GDP is an aggregate. It is the aggregate of what a country produces, but it doesn't measure the distribution of the rewards from producing that. That is something one could do, but it would require a value judgment. You would have to weight the deservingness of the poor versus the rich. And economists have kind of struggled with this for centuries, actually. This is not something that's a new idea. How do you measure overall utility? But it would require a value judgment, and therefore different people would disagree about how to do it. So we think you have to keep GDP as an anchor, and where it doesn't get at all of the social or welfare issues that you want to discuss, then you supplement it with other data. It's probably never going to be possible to produce one single number that somehow summarizes the happiness of the totality of people in the world. But I think GDP is a key concept, and we'll keep looking at it.
Thank you very much. Maybe just take the one last question here, gentleman in the...
Thank you, Cameron from China. A slight further moderation of China's economic outlook in 2018. We would like to know, will China continue to play a bigger role in terms
of Well, China has indeed come to play a much bigger role in global governance and coordination. Obviously as a member of the G20, it's the IMF's third biggest shareholder. It has now entered the SDR. So, there's no question that China is a major player. As I mentioned, Chinese growth, just quantitatively, is incredibly important to world growth. So it's going to be important for China to play its role in supporting the multilateral system. Judging from President Xi's comments here in Davos last year, it's very, very eager to do that. That will require, I think, further steps from China to also open its own economy to imports and work on a range of issues. Everyone is going to have to contribute to make the multilateral system work better, and China's role is critical.
Thank you very much, Maury. You'll have a chance to hear more from Maury over the next day or so here in Davos, and of course Madame Lagarde. I just want to thank him, thank Jean-Maria, Madame Lagarde, and thanks to all of you for coming along today. We'll see you in the course of the next few days.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this press conference in the very snowy Davos at the 48th annual meeting for the World Economic Forum. Thank you for joining us in the room and on live stream. Today I'm joined by my panelist, Tarzyskios Kazil, Mayor of Davos. Unfortunately, the Ulrich Speerhoff, the CEO of ABB, won't be able to join us because of that aforementioned snow, but Christoph Sieder, Head of Communication at ABB, will be joining us. So today I will invite my panelists to speak on this partnership for sustainable transportation. Mr. Kazili, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Dear Mr. Sieder from ABB, dear participants of the World Economic Forum, dear media representatives, dear guests. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you in the name of the municipality of Davos to today's media event. In fall 2017, the municipality of Davos and ABB decided to go into a partnership in the field of e-mobility. Actually, this partnership consists of an electric bus project during the annual meeting 2018, as well as the installation of 8 electric charging stations for private e-mobility within the city boundaries. Other projects are hopefully to follow. For the municipality of Davos, this partnership is a unique possibility to enlarge its infrastructure for private e-mobility and to gain experience with e-mobility in the public transport sector. We are very pleased to have the first e-bus fast charging in Davos for the next days. Only a few days ago, this bus has won the World Door Award 2018, which is awarded by the Swiss Federation Office of Energy for excellent energy performance. The municipality of Davos has been focusing on a consistent and goal-oriented energy policy for many years. In 2011, Davos was the first municipality in Canton of Grisons to get the label of an energy city. This label is given to cities that are promoting renewable energies and ecologically sensitive mobility and efficient use of our resources. Since its certification as an energy city, the municipality of Davos has been concentrating its efforts mainly on energy-saving measures in its own buildings and companies, being a role model for its inhabitants by doing so. Many municipality buildings were energetically refurbished and the heating systems were changed to systems using renewable energies. In the sector of mobility, the municipality has focused its efforts on an attractive public transport and on promoting measures for non-motorized traffic. With the new e-bus project during this year's World Economic Forum, the public transport company of Davos gets the possibility to tie in with its pioneer work in 1999. At that time, the public transport company changed its gas station to sulfur-free diesel and installed waste gas treatments in its buses. Today, all public buses of Davos and its partners are equipped with oxidation catalyzers and particle filters. Most of the traction power is gained by SCR technology. However, CO2 emissions could not be reduced significantly so far. This is only possible by emission-free systems such as e-buses. The present e-bus test is therefore very important to see if a permanent use of a buses on 1,500 meters above sea level is possible. Of course, electricity is gained to 100% by hydroelectric power from the Vos and the canton of Grisons. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we have been aware since many years that we have to decrease our CO2 emissions in order to prevent further climate change. And we know that this cannot only be done in the sector of heating, but that we need to change our mobility as well. Our results in the mobility sector were little so far, but it is the present project and cooperation with ABB that allows us to go a step further. We can gain experience with emission-free power systems for public and private transport, and we will hopefully be able to continue our pioneer work in this field. We are happy to present our e-bus project to a large international public during this year's World Economic Forum. So, thank you for your attention.
Actually, there will be, right after this press conference, an opportunity for you to try. There will be a demonstration of these award-winning e-buses, and you'll be able to see and experience that. So now I'm going to ask Mr. Cedar to explain the involvement of ABB in this partnership.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Tarcisius. And thank you all for coming. Of course, we're thrilled about this partnership, and we're very excited that we can announce this here today right at the beginning of the World Economic Forum 2018. Davos has always been a city that looks forward and leads the way, and we at ABB are honored to have been able to support the city in doing just that for well over a century. In the 1890s, our predecessor company, BBC, equipped the Davos power station with a transformer and a generator, amongst other equipment. And we electrified the Davos-Platz-Schatzalp funicular railway that many of you are familiar with already back in 1924. The local utility grid, powered by hydroelectric generators and solar installations, employs ABB technology. And now we are partnering with Davos to install some of our most advanced e-mobility infrastructure systems for both public and private transportation. So why are we doing this, and why are we doing this here and now? Quite simply, so that participants attending this year's World Economic Forum meeting can witness how efficient and effective e-mobility already is today. The centerpiece of this partnership will be the same ABB electric bus charging technology that won the prestigious Swiss Innovation Award Watt Door. It's a revolutionary new flash charging solution for electric buses that is emission-free, silent, and requires no overhead lines or embedded tracks. This is TOSA. It looks just like a regular city bus until you look carefully at the roof. There you will find a laser-controlled moving arm which connects in less than a second to an overhead receptacle integrated into the bus shelter. Its flash charging technology delivers a 20-second high power charge at selected bus stops as passengers leave or are boarding the bus. This is world record time. Thanks to recharging along the route, the battery size and the weight of the bus have been reduced, resulting in increased space for passengers and greater overall energy efficiency. So while these e-buses have smaller quick charge batteries, they are big enough to carry more passengers, and they can change their routes when needed. So TOSA paves the way to a better future for people who live in cities. ABB first installed TOSA in Geneva, and we have been contracted to supply this technology for a new fleet of 24-meter articulated buses in the French city of Nantes. When complete, those buses are projected to carry some 2,500 commuters every hour. The beauty of the TOSA system is its flexibility. It can be applied to fully electric or hybrid buses and can be charged wherever there's a roof-mounted connector. For the duration of the World Economic Forum, our TOSA flash charging system will be running from the Tourist Information Center to the hospital. The charging stations at bus stops along this route will be powered by curbside transformers, which take alternating current from the power grid and convert it to direct current used by the e-bus. ABB is very pleased to partner with Davos on this installation, given its deserved reputation as a city that promotes scalable, sustainable, green urban development projects. We strongly support such projects. We're complementing the temporary TOSA bus route with 8 permanent Terra multi-standard DC charging stations for private cars. And many of the trains serving Davos are equipped with ABB technology, as is the power grid, powered by hydroelectric generators and solar installations. In short, Davos has adopted an end-to-end electric mobility system that will serve as a potential global model for clean, climate-friendly, sustainable transport. Sustainable transport solutions make up an important part of ABB's extensive portfolio of clean, energy-efficient technologies. We've worked particularly hard in recent years to expand our position as the world's leading provider of electric vehicle fast charging stations, with more than 6,000 chargers installed in already 56 countries. And through our recently announced partnership with the Formula E electric car racing organization, ABB is helping to refine the design and functionality of electric vehicles and infrastructure, as well as associated digital platforms. We are here because we want to show the world that our e-mobility solutions are as resilient and reliable as they are simple and elegant. The World Economic Forum is an ideal location for this e-mobility initiative because the WEF serves as an enabler and connector. Its goal is to improve the state of the world by engaging business, political, academic, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. It is our hope that by showcasing the latest e-mobility solutions here, we can underline that transport technologies present a tremendous opportunity in the fight against climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We might have a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to open up the floor. And then we can go ahead. So a mic will come to you. Please state your name and the organization that you're with.
Thank you. Two questions. One is not really related to this. Mr. Mayor, would you give us an indication on the snow and how Davos has been handling the snow? Because I believe it's 3 weeks now that you're having to work overtime. Maybe just give us a little bit of background to that. And Mr. Cedar, could you maybe update us on Solar Impulse? It made a big splash here last year, and now it's been quiet for the next year. So perhaps what's going on that side? Thank you.
So at the moment we have a lot of problems with the snow. In the last 48 hours became more than 2 meters of snow, and that's a big problem for us because we have always to transport the snow out of Davos, and we don't have at the moment enough places to keep out the snow. So we have problems with avalanches. In the morning we tried to shoot the avalanches, so 2 of 10 they go down, and the other 8 we must try tomorrow. I hope that tomorrow we can fly with the helicopter, and I hope that we can shoot the other avalanches. But it will be okay. I hope so. Tomorrow it's finished with snow, and we will have tomorrow and the other 2 or 3 days of this week beautiful weather with a lot of sunshine, and then we don't have so much problems as we had the last time. So we try to shoot the avalanche with the helicopter, so with a gas bomb. It's just the right word. So, and then the bomb 1 meter or 2 meters over the snow level, there is an explosion, and then the avalanche, we hope so that they goes down. It's not so easy to do it when we need a lot of, or we need the beautiful weather. that we can fly with the helicopter, and tomorrow at 10 o'clock, one launch, just one, goes down in the Vossdorf.
Regarding your question about Solar Impulse, so Solar Impulse was a very exciting project for us. ABB is a pioneering technology company serving utilities, industry, transport, and infrastructure. And obviously for us it was key to be associated with the project. We got engaged heavily, we had engineers on the project, and as you all know, it turned out to be not a one-year project, but a 2-year project. So in 2016, when it finally successfully circumnavigated the world as the first plane in human history and not using a single drop of fossil fuel, we were, I guess, as thrilled as Bertrand Piccard was and André Boschberg, our dear friends. We're still in close contact, but as you know, the program was wrapped up afterwards. And so at the moment, there is no further plans for Solar Impulse to roll out a second such project, from our understanding at least. But we were highly, highly pleased with the outcome, with a lot of R&D work that we put into, and we learned a lot from that project that we will now apply for our customer benefits.
So we have one more time for one more question on the sustainable transportation. Go ahead.
Andreas Schwander, Basler Zeitung. I have a question concerning the bus stops and the charging system. So how much kilowatt you can charge at one time, and how, if you have then a fleet of buses, how much would be the investment into infrastructure if you would have to put it up, for example, with the example in Nantes?
Let me start answering with your second question. Obviously, the benefit of the system is that you do not require an overhead infrastructure. You don't need any sort of wayside lines to be installed. So versus the current existing trolleybus system, it's a huge advantage in that sense. And of course, then also from a maintenance perspective, it's much more efficient. And then it depends obviously on the terrain, on the topology of the bus line, whether it's a hilly terrain, whether it's a flat terrain, whether you have a lot of stops at traffic lights, and then you need to design the bus line according to the needs. Where will most of the people board, where you have the heaviest load? So that's, like I said, it's the beauty is its flexibility. It can be installed anywhere. It can also be installed, for example, especially in suburban areas, so where you, the construction of overhead lines would be very expensive, taking from the city centers to the outskirts. So there we see a huge market and a huge potential. Also, of course, if you have cities where you have a historic monument or where that under historic protection, and then you don't need to have all the cabling and wiring, or cities like Davos, where you have to serve a lot of, as you know, Davos is a very long stretched city, but then you have a lot of outskirts settlements that you can reach with that e-bus solution in a quite inexpensive and efficient way. So that's what we believe. Regarding the voltage, I would like to throw the question to our expert, Saswato here. Do you know the highest voltage possible? 600 kilowatts. Yeah. Yes. It's flash charging. You need a relatively thick cable to every bus stop. Yes, it's a robot arm that comes out with the cable and that connects to the bus. And therefore it's a flash charging technology. Like I said, it's world record. So we can do it actually in 15 seconds. The requirement in Geneva was to do it within 20 seconds, but it can be done in 15 seconds.
I just asked you to
Sorry,
speak into
you
the
need
mic.
this 600 kilowatt cable, a relatively thick cable with how much ampere, to go to this bus stop, which before used only electricity for lighting, isn't it?
Just what you can answer.
Yeah, the idea is if you did it so quickly, then the grid would trip. So as the buses are moving, slowly there's a battery that's being charged, and when the bus comes, it gives the charge in a flash. So that way it does not trip the grid. So it draws from the grid very slowly.
So you have some condensators in.
Right, right.
Good. Very quick question, we'll take it, and then we'll have to wrap up. Thank you for your enthusiasm.
It's my third time to be here, but I found it's the most terrible traffic jam here today. And our bus from Zurich to here cost our cost us maybe 4 hours, much longer than usual. So do you think this problem will be improved, or what can we do for it?
I don't know. The problem is that we have so much of snow. What shall we do? It's impossible. We must put the snow, or try to bring the snow out of Davos, and we can do nothing. We hope that tomorrow or tomorrow morning, during this night, I hope that we became maybe 20 or 30 centimeters of snow, maybe a half of a meter. The only what you can do is take the train or take the public transport possibility that we have. You can take the train from the Davos-Dorf to the Davos-Platz or to Klosters, or that's the only what you can do.
Okay. The best is you take the ABB train.
Okay.
And on that note,
the ABB e-bus.
Yes. On that note, I will thank you all for joining us today for this press conference, for the people in the room and online. And I again invite you to go to the demonstration to see these award-winning e-buses. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, and a very cordial welcome to the 48th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Why are you here? There are 4 reasons and 4 wishes I have for you. First, you are part of a community. This annual meeting in Davos is not a normal conference. It's a gathering of members of a multi-stakeholder community. And therefore, I'm very happy to see so many familiar faces here. But there are also newcomers. And may I just ask the newcomers to stand up? Give them a big hand. So it's the foremost, as we would say, multi-stakeholder community which exists in the world. You have here, of course, our partners and members, business leaders. You have politicians, the heads of international organizations. And here would like to welcome one of our co-chairs, Christine Lagarde. We have here civil society. Most of the, or practically all of the key international NGOs are here. You have trade union leaders. You have the young generation, very important. And you have science and academia. You have the media. So a real global multi-stakeholder community based on our firm belief that the big issues in our world cannot be solved by governments alone, by business alone, or by civil society alone. We need collaborative efforts. No nation, no person, no stakeholder group alone can really address the complex global agenda in a constructive way. But you are here not only to be part of a community, you are here to engage. And that's my second wish. Of course, it's very exciting with all the plenary sessions we have here, with all the speakers and the political personalities whom we will receive this week. But actually, for us, what is very important are those 400 smaller sessions, where you really can engage to live up to the mission of the World Economic Forum, to improve the state of the world. It's not only a multi-stakeholder meeting, it's also a meeting which deals with the global agenda in an integrated, comprehensive way to pinpoint priorities at the beginning of the year, to define problems, to find solutions, and possible, if ever possible, to start joint action. So the third wish, you have to engage into the spirit of Davos. I know there may be speakers here where we may not always join, share the opinion, but let's not forget, the spirit of Davos is a spirit of interaction based on 3 values. First, respect human dignity and diversity. Second, serve the community more than yourself. And number 3, be a trustee of the next generation. And finally, my last wish is that you are here not only with your brains, but that you are here with your soul and with your heart. With your soul to really address the issues with a longer-term vision, and with your heart to feel passionate about what we are doing, passionate about our engagement for humanity. And this evening is an evening of passion. And before Hilde Schwab takes the floor, I have the great pleasure to invite His Eminence Cardinal Turkson, who will read for us on behalf, who will speak to us on behalf of His Holiness Pope Francis. Your Eminence, please come to the floor here. Thank you.
Well, Your Excellencies, my brothers and sisters, one of the stakeholders Professor talked about was the Vatican, who said Pope Francis was invited to this event. But on account of his recent visit, as you know, to Latin America, to Chile and Peru, couldn't be here, so sends this small message to Professor Schwab, which I'd now like to read. To Professor Klaus Schwab, Executive Chairman of the World Economic Forum, I'm grateful to you for your invitation to participate in the World Economic Forum 2018 and for your desire to include the perspectives of the Church, Catholic Church, and the Holy See at the meeting in Davos. I thank you also for your efforts to bring this perspective to the attention of those gathered in this annual forum, including the distinguished political and governmental leaders and authorities present and all those engaged in the fields of business, economy, work, culture, as they discuss the challenges, the concerns, hopes, prospects of a world today and of the future. The theme chosen for this year's forum, Creating a Shared Future in a Fractured World, is very timely. I trust that it will assist in guiding your deliberations, as you said before, better foundations for building inclusive, just, and supporting societies, capable of restoring dignity to those who live with great uncertainty and who are unable to dream of a better world. At the level of global governance, we are increasingly aware that there is a growing fragmentation between states and institutions. New actors are emerging, as well as new economic competition and regional trade agreements. Even the most recent technologies are transforming economic models and globalized world itself, which, conditioned by private interests and an ambition for profit at all costs, seem to favor further fragmentation and individualism rather than to facilitate approaches that are more and more inclusive. The recurring financial instabilities has brought new problems and serious challenges that governments must confront, such as the growth of unemployment, the increase in various forms of poverty, and the widening of the socioeconomic gap and new forms of slavery, often rooted in situations of conflict, migration, and various social problems. Together with this, we encounter certain rather lifestyles marked by an opulence which is no longer sustainable and frequently indifferent to the world around us, and especially the poorest in our midst. To our dismay, we see technical and economic questions dominating political debate, to the detriment of genuine concern for human beings. Men and women risk being reduced to mere cogs in a machine that treats them as items of consumption to be exploited. with the result that, as so tragically apparent, whenever a human life no longer proves useful for that machine, it is discarded with few qualms. In this context, it is vital to safeguard the dignity of the human person, in particular by offering to all people real opportunities for integral human development, and by implementing economic policies that favor the family. Economic freedom must not prevail over the practical freedom of men and women and over their rights. And the market must not be absolute, but honor the exigencies of justice. Economic models, therefore, are always required to observe an ethic of sustainable and integral development, based on values that place the human person and his and her right at the center. So before the very many barriers of injustice, of loneliness, of distrust, and of suspicion, which are still being elaborated in our day, the world of labor is called upon to take courageous steps in order that being and working together is not merely a slogan, but a program for the present and for the future. Only through a firm resolve, shared by all economic actors, may we hope to give a new direction to the destiny of our world. So too, artificial intelligence, robotics, and other technological innovation must be so employed that they contribute to the service of humanity and to the protection of our common home, rather than to the contrary, as some assessments unfortunately foresee. We cannot remain silent in the face of the suffering of millions of people whose dignity is wounded, nor can we continue to move forward as if the spread of poverty and injustice had no cause. It is a moral imperative, a responsibility that involves all of us to create the right conditions to allow each person to live in a dignified manner. By rejecting a throwaway culture and a mentality of indifference, the entrepreneurial world has enormous potential to effect substantial change by increasing the quality of productivity, creating new jobs, respecting labor laws, fighting against public and private corruption, and promoting social justice, together with a fair and equitable sharing of profits. There is a grave responsibility to exercise wise discernment, for the decisions made will be decisive for shaping the world of tomorrow and that of future generations. Thus, if we want a more secure future, one that encourages the prosperity of all, then it is necessary to keep the compass continually oriented towards the true north, represented by true, authentic values. Now is the time to take courageous and bold steps for our beloved planet. This is the right moment to put into action our responsibility to contribute to the development of humanity. And so I hope that this 2018 meeting of the World Economic Forum will allow an open, free, and respectful exchange and be inspired above all else by the desire to advance the common good. In renewing my best wishes for the success of the meeting, I willingly invoke upon you and all participating in this forum the divine blessings of wisdom and of strength. Signed in the Vatican on the 12th of January by Pope Francis. And I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, this year marks the 24th annual anniversary of the Crystal Awards. It was our late friend, the great violinist and conductor, Lord Yehudi Menuhin, who inspired Klaus and me to start this award. It has always stood for leadership, vision, and compassion. We want to honor personalities who are not only outstanding artists, but who contribute to positive change. Here are the three awardees. Kate Blanchett. She receives the award 2018 for her leadership in raising awareness for the refugee crisis. Kate Blanchett was born in Melbourne, Australia. Already as a small child, she used to imagine stories. Today, she is an internationally acclaimed and award-winning actor and director on stage and screen. She has received 2 Academy Awards and 3 Golden Globes. Her contribution to culture has been globally recognized, and today she is considered one of the greatest actors of our times. In 2016, Kate Blanchett was appointed UNHCR Global Goodwill Ambassador in recognition of her commitment to refugees. She has traveled into numerous countries, to Lebanon, Jordan, and also to her home country, Australia, to advocate for increased solidarity and sharing responsibility for the millions of displaced people across the world. She is committed to raising awareness on issues of forced displacement, and in particular of statelessness, which affects millions of people worldwide, denying them basic rights, access to education and health care, and the ability to work and travel. I would like to ask Kate Blanchett now to join me on stage.
Secret's out. I'm as blind as a bat. Thank you, Mrs. Schwab and Professor Schwab and the World Economic Forum for honouring me with this award. I'm deeply grateful for the recognition it gives to the scale and severity of the global refugee crisis, along with the acknowledgement that we all have a stake in identifying and enacting solutions. So we hear the alarming statistics, 66 million almost human beings forcibly displaced around the world. And we see the fallout from continued failure of world leaders to secure peace. Whilst in many quarters there's divisive and polarising language being used for political gain that gnaws away at our empathy and our compassion, and we sense the geopolitical, the social and the economic and the environmental threats that will drive yet more human flows. And we understand that lost generations of uneducated, disenfranchised and displaced children not only represents a vast loss of potential, but also a threat for future global security and prosperity. So surely we must now accept our role in finding new ways to respond to the refugee crisis, both in the short term, but also across the years and years of exile, to ensure that refugees are less victim and burden and more actors and participants alongside their host communities to the benefit of all. Now in Davos this week, there will be full of talk of disruption, the fourth industrial revolution, shared solutions in a fractured world. But nowhere is the fractured world more humanly embodied than in the refugee. It's a person who's uprooted from all that they hold dear, forced to flee, often resented and reviled in the country where they settle, labelled as an economic burden or a terrorist threat. And this is the narrative that we truly need to disrupt. Since when do we lose our focus on the human, on our commonalities, on our shared bonds, on there but for the grace of God? Now, I feel incredibly privileged to have had the opportunity to work with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, as a Goodwill Ambassador, and to get into the field and meet refugees firsthand. And in Jordan, in a meagre shelter in Azraq camp, I met Shadi, And Shadi had been twice displaced, first from Syria and then from Yemen. And his heartache was clear as he showed me these very fragmented, worn, much-loved, precious photos of his parents and his brothers, long since separated, and perhaps he was never to see them again. And Shadi had left behind, when he fled, his own ambitions of becoming a scientist, like his heroes Pierre and Marie Curie and Albert Einstein. But ever resourceful, he challenged his energies instead into the future of others, and he worked as a volunteer teacher in the camp, imparting his knowledge and his love of science to refugee children, building in them both the skills but also the desire to one day return home to their country to rebuild it. Because Einstein had been a refugee too. So if we can just drop for one moment the loaded label of refugee, just to see the person behind it. Shadi, an aspirational, technically gifted, resilient, generous man, father, husband, teacher, and we can begin to move him from them to us. Because it's very, very easy to turn our backs on the abstraction of the enormous numbers of those in need, on the others. But standing face to face with just one human being, staring them in the eye, hearing their story, and experiencing our common humanity, it's much harder to do nothing. Because once you've borne witness, you cannot turn away. Now, in this room, and over the course of the week, there's an incredible opportunity to reconnect and start transformative thinking, and turn this thinking into transformative action. Now, whether your lens is one of sustainable profit or business integrity or competitive advantage, innovation, creativity, or security, please consider the incredible opportunities that come from engaging in this issue and with organisations like UNHCR, and perhaps the longer-term risks of not doing so. But beyond that, as people, as parents, sons, daughters, effective leaders, inspiring role models, and people who understand the value of legacy, consider why this is important to you, and I ask you to be reinvigorated by your moral compass. Now, the New York Declaration has given a huge opportunity to us this year, to the states, to the private sector, to civil society, to UN agencies and NGOs, to develop a template for a more sustainable solution to the displacement scenarios. And by marrying humanitarian and development action and drawing on business acumen and resources and technological capabilities of the private sector, we can achieve far more effective and genuinely shared solutions. So we think not just of sheltering and feeding refugees, that's incredibly important, but also connecting them and developing their capacities and welcoming their skills, their resilience and their hope. So alongside some inspiring business leaders who are already making huge and innovative contributions and who actually made it here tonight in the snow, Filippo Grande, who's the UNHCR High Commissioner, will be here. Unfortunately not tonight, he's still on his way, but he'll be here with you all week. And he is a remarkable man. He's an innovative and compassionate strategist. So I urge you to take the time to engage with him and with the UNHCR team to see how we can best work together on those shared solutions. This award is far much more for him than me, and it's an honour to work with the UNHCR. And definitely, Professor Schwab, I'm here with my soul. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Shah Rukh Khan received the 2018 Crystal Award for his leadership in championing children's and women's rights in India. Shah Rukh Khan was born in Delhi, India. When his school teacher asked him what he wanted to be in the future, he said he would become a Bollywood star. Though his teacher tried to explain to him that his dream was unrealistic, his mother's response was, if Shah Rukh Khan says it will happen, it will happen. So the story goes. Today, with a following that runs into the billions and a series of films that speak of his tremendous talent and intense work, Shah Rukh Khan is an icon who entertains and inspires his fellow countrymen and women, and who is loved by film audiences around the world, across languages and cultures. Shah Rukh Khan has also been one of India's leading philanthropists. He has been instrumental in funding and launching several charitable causes in India. In October 2013, he founded the non-profit organization Mir Foundation, named after his beloved father, Mirtaj Mohammed Khan. It provides support to women who are victims of attacks and suffer major acid attacks and suffer major burn injuries. The foundation provides medical treatment, legal aid, vocational training, as well as rehabilitation and livelihood support. Shah Rukh Khan has also helped create specialized children's hospital wards and has supported childcare centers with free boarding for children undergoing cancer treatment. I would like to now ask Shah Rukh Khan to join me on stage.
I'm genuinely and deeply grateful for this honor, and it is indeed a privilege to be in the company of two phenomenal and extraordinary human beings and talent, Kate Blanchett and Sir Elton John. She is, of course, a lady who commands the wind, and you, sir, command the song of a billion hearts, including mine. So I'm really, really touched that I've been chosen between these two. Just a special request, before you go, can I do a selfie? Now, there I've embarrassed my children. Actors are renowned narcissists. No matter how much we pretend not to believe in external beauty, we tend to be obsessed by it one way or another. And perhaps being surrounded by this obsession of beauty, a few years ago I came across a lady who had been brutalized by an acid attack. And it kind of changed my life, or the perspective of it at least. To disfigure a woman by throwing acid on her face is, to me, one of the basest, crudest acts of subjugation imaginable. At the source of it lies the view that a woman does not have the right to assert her choice, to say no to the advances of a man or a group of people. And yet each of the women I met, I'd found within them the courage to move on with their lives and to reject the idea of victimhood. What struck me most about them was this, that what was done to them only made them braver and stronger and more able to free themselves to make the choices everyone around them was telling them they could not make, couldn't make, or should not make. From them I have learned how courage can catalyze victimhood into heroism, how solidarity rather than charity enables the human will to overcome, how equality is not a concept, but a truth that encompasses all living beings, and how the service of others is not a choice anymore for any of us. It is a duty that all of us must fulfill in the name of humankind. When I journeyed through the lives of these heroic women and children through the work of Mir Foundation, I experienced a complete reversal of perspective. I stumbled upon the truth that there are no benefactors and no beneficiaries between living beings anymore. There is just a vast pool of resources, natural, spiritual, economically, technologically, that everyone is equally entitled to, but only some have gained more access to it, either by accident, as in my case, or by design and talent and hard work, as in the case of all of you present here. Standing here before all of you who constitute perhaps the most powerful group of human beings in the world, dare I say that power is one of these perspectives we like to maintain a certain way. But power actually needs a complete reversal more than any other thing in the world today. I was sitting with my 5-year-old son, babysitting him just before I came here, and suddenly he screamed, "Papa, Papa, my eye went into my hair. Can you get my eye out of my hair?" He didn't say, "Get my hair out of my eye," like we all believe they do. It's a bit like that when you have power, I think. You think things get in its way, but actually it's the power that is getting in the way. It gets in the way of universal access to resources because it seeks to control and enclose them. So we, the powerful, need to get out of the way, I think. To pick the barriers apart, the ones that give us names and races and colors and hierarchies. We need to get out of the way and into the work of breaking open access for each and everyone with a true sense of ourselves, not as more powerful or less privileged, but genuinely as equals. That is what I have learned from my beautifully scarred women. I'm grateful to these brave women and children who I work with for all that they have done for me, to the World Economic Forum and all of you present here today for recognizing their heroism by conferring this award and this reward upon me. Also, I want to thank my sister and my wife and my little daughter for bringing me up well and teaching me the value of requesting, sometimes imploring, and if I may add, sometimes even begging a yes from a woman instead of forcing it upon her. Thank you so much, Professor Schwabs, for having me here. And thank you, Mrs. Schwabs. Thank you, Davos. Namaskar and Jai Hind. Thank you.
Sir Elton John receives the 2018 Crystal Award for his leadership in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Sir Elton John was born just outside London. At 3 years old, he decided that he wanted to be a musician after hearing Elvis Presley's music. He taught himself how to play piano when he was only 4 years old. And at the age of 11, he won a junior scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music, where he attended classes on weekends. Sir Elton released his first album in 1970, which made him an instant international star and launched his monumental career that has spanned more than 5 decades. Today, he is one of the top-selling solo artists of all time, with 35 gold and 25 platinum albums and 29 consecutive top 40 hits. He has sold more than 250 million records worldwide. At the height of his fame, he met a young man, Ryan White, who had contracted HIV/AIDS through a blood transfusion. Through Ryan's eyes, Sir Elton witnessed firsthand the pain and suffering inflicted by society on those affected by HIV/AIDS. In 1992, he established the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which today is one of the leading non-profit organizations in that field. It has raised more than $400 million to date to support hundreds of programs around the globe for prevention, service, and advocacy. I would like to ask Sir Elton John to join me on stage.
One ridiculous pair of glasses to another. Right. I would love to thank the World Economic Forum, Professor and Hilde Schwab, for this incredible honor. Good evening, everybody. And thank you so much for this award. I am also, I should say, very lucky. I've been able to spend my life following a passion. And that pursuit has led me to a second passion, which has led in turn to this award. To be given prizes for doing what you have always wanted to do anyway is more luck than any one person actually deserves. Music was my original passion, and I was fortunate that it became my life. But I found in time that this is not enough. In my case, passion led me into some very dark places. I wasn't a great person for a long time. I lost who I really was, and I didn't like who I had become. I lost my humanity, my connection, and my respect for myself. Yet the fame and the recognition I had acquired was a blessing as well as a curse, because it led me towards philanthropy, the second aspect of the work you have recognized this evening. I started the Elton John AIDS Foundation because I wanted to reclaim my sense of who I was. I wanted to reconnect. I wanted to be a decent person. As I look back now on how these two passions have defined my public life, I've come to realize that in both cases, it is the link to a common humanity that really matters. Everything that we do that counts involves a connection. If there had been no Elvis Presley to inspire me, I would not have made music. All the people who work to produce what I do help me to find an audience. And without the listening public, there is no audience to reach. I am described as a solo artist, but nobody is truly a solo artist. And the price of being connected is that we must never turn a blind eye to suffering. It was that fellow feeling which inspired the Elton John AIDS Foundation, and over a quarter of a century, we have tried to help millions of people to heal and to feel human again. In doing this, I have discovered that something is worth doing only when there is a purpose and that we can be proud of. There is something that applies to everyone here. All the leaders who come to Davos are big figures. You've all made it, baby. But what are you making? What worth does it have if it does not strengthen the bonds of a humanity? If we are not seeking to change the world for the better through our work, what is the point of coming here? Yes, there is glory, perhaps fame and prestige. There is wealth too, but for what? Good work gives you something bigger than fame, richer than wealth, finer even than prizes. I know this to be true. When I founded the Elton John AIDS Foundation 25 years ago, AIDS was a death sentence. There was no treatment to prolong life, let alone to save it. Today, there are 20 million people the world over who are on life-saving HIV medicine. Incredibly, we are now contemplating the end of AIDS by 2030 as a real possibility. There is no prize to rival that. And it is important to reflect on how it was done. How we have come so far against one of the most lethal diseases the world has ever known in just over a generation. Of course, the science, the money, and the know-how are essential, but truly it was done by giving every single person due attention, by recognizing their humanity, by leaving no one behind. The failure to treat people with equal respect is what fueled AIDS. The moment we began to respect, the moment we chased out shame, was the moment we started to fight back. I will continue being part of this work till the day I die. It is what connects me to my humanity. And as you explore creating a shared future in a fractured world this week, I urge you to use that sense of human connection and your amazing talents to change the world. It needs to be changed. The equality in this world is, to be honest with you, disgraceful. Finally, I thank you. I'm deeply honored to be recognized by you today. Thank you very much. And make changes. Thank you.